why many female pastors are operating under the spirit of Jezebel. Imagine this: the person you trust most within your church, the one who guides your spiritual life, is operating under a pattern that the Bible identifies with one of the most dangerous figures, Jezebel. In recent years, a silent problem has begun to affect many congregations. It is not an obvious heresy, but an internal cancer made up of control, emotional manipulation, and abuse of spiritual authority. And what is most surprising is that it does not always come from men. Many leaders, pastors, and influential women are beginning to replicate attitudes that disrupt order and damage the spiritual health of the church, in the same way that Jezebel did in ancient times. Attention, this is not a witch hunt, nor is it an attack on women's ministry. It is a serious and urgent call to discernment. Do you know how to recognize when a leader, regardless of gender, begins to influence through emotions, personal power, or manipulation? If you can't identify it, your church and your faith may be at risk. In this episode, we're going to delve deeply into this uncomfortable but necessary topic. We'll analyze why this pattern called Jezebel has become so common in the modern church, what the clearest signs of its presence are, and, above all, what the right response should be to protect and restore spiritual order. Stay with us. Understanding this issue can be the difference between avoiding irreversible damage and preserving the spiritual health of God's house. We began to scrutinize To understand why this pattern appears in some female leaders today, we first need to look at the original figure. Jezebel was not simply a woman of the past. She was the living embodiment of a destructive leadership style that blended power, manipulation, and corrupted spirituality. Historically, Jezebel was the daughter of the king of Sidon, a pagan kingdom deeply marked by idolatry and sensual cults. When she married King Ahab, she did not arrive as a submissive wife. She arrived with her own religious system, her prophets, her practices, and her agenda. She did not adapt to God's people. She imposed her will. She used her influence to manipulate decisions that were not hers to make. She usurped her husband's authority. She attacked any spiritual leader who stood in the way of her interests. She promoted an attractive, emotional, and permissive spirituality that corrupted the people from within. Jezebel did not rule from the throne, but from the shadows. Furthermore, she maintained a carefully constructed image. Her appearance was not merely decorative. It was a tool of power, designed to impress, intimidate, and control. Jezebel knew that image matters, that charisma opens doors, and that appearance seduces even without words. This is not just an ancient story. It is a pattern, a leadership style, a way of operating, a model that the Bible presents to warn future generations. Jezebel represents what happens when spiritual influence is used for personal gain and when leadership is tainted with manipulation and pride. It's important to make something absolutely clear from the beginning. The Jezebel pattern is not feminine. It doesn't belong to a woman. It's not a spirit exclusive to one gender. It's a way of operating, a leadership style that can manifest in men and women alike. However, in recent years, many churches have observed that this pattern frequently appears in women who hold positions of spiritual influence, not because they are women, but because the emotional and relational structure of certain leadership roles can become fertile ground for controlling and manipulative attitudes to emerge. A Jezebel spirit is not manifested by preaching or having authority. It is manifested when spiritual authority is used to dominate people, feed the ego, or lead the church through emotions rather than convictions. Today, this pattern can be seen in leaders who appear highly anointed, very active in the work, and very charismatic, but who operate from a wounded heart, a need for approval, or a deep desire to control what happens around them. The appearance is spiritual, but the motivation is personal. This phenomenon is not theoretical, it is real. And that is why the church needs to discern when a person is ministering from a genuine calling and when they are operating from emotions, wounds, or ambitions that open the door to a pattern similar to Jezebel's. Let's look at the signs below. Signal 1. control and manipulation. The first sign that a leadership is operating under a Jezebel-like pattern is control. Not firm leadership, not good management, but emotional, spiritual, and organizational control. This control manifests itself when the leader needs to decide everything. She cannot delegate. She does not accept different opinions. And if someone proposes an idea that did not come from her, she automatically invalidates it. The church stops functioning as a body and begins to move to the rhythm of a single person. In many cases, this control is not exercised openly, but through emotional tools. Crying in critical moments, prolonged silences to generate guilt, indirect comments that pressure the pastor or the team, or insinuations such as, "If you don't listen to me, then perhaps this isn't the place for me." It can also be presented as victimhood. The leader presents herself as the only one who works, the only one who carries the vision, or the only one who feels the spiritual direction. But beneath that sensitivity lies a motivation: to move people's will through emotions, not principles. When control dominates the atmosphere of a ministry, the church stops growing healthily. Obedience is replaced by fear. Unity is replaced by dependence. And the presence of God is replaced by the will of one person. That is the first symptom that an unnatural spirit is taking hold. Sign 2. Spiritual and emotional seduction. The second sign is seduction. Not necessarily physical seduction, although that does appear in some cases. The most common form in the context of the church is emotional and spiritual seduction. We're not talking about obvious flirtation, but rather a subtle, carefully constructed influence, where the leader creates dependence in those around her. She becomes indispensable. Everyone must turn to her for validation, affirmation, or approval. Her word becomes more important than personal prayer or biblical counsel. Sometimes seduction is subtle, frequent flattery directed at musicians, servers, or even the pastor himself. Phrases like, "Only you understand me," "God uses you like no one else," "No one values you like I do." These words, spoken at the right moment, don't build up, they ensnare. In other cases, seduction is disguised as spirituality. Supposed revelations that always favor the leader, prophecies that exalt her position, declarations that promise special blessings only for those who align themselves with her. It is not spiritual guidance. It is emotional manipulation, elevated to religious language. When the people's attention begins to revolve more around the leader than the message, when people seek her approval more than God's, then faith is no longer being built. Dependency is being built. That environment is the perfect breeding ground for a Jezebel-like pattern. Sign 3. Permissive doctrines and distorted spirituality. The third sign appears when leadership begins to soften, reinterpret, or relax principles that have always been clear. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow, progressive, almost imperceptible process, where biblical truth loses weight and is replaced by an emotional or convenient spirituality. Permissive doctrines arise when behavior is justified instead of corrected, when the message is tailored to the leader's emotions or people's preferences, rather than aligned with the sound teaching of the Word. In many cases, a pattern emerges. The importance of character is minimized. Holiness is ridiculed as religiosity. Relationships, conversations, or lifestyles that would previously have been corrected with love and firmness are tolerated. And it's all wrapped up in phrases like, "It's the heart that matters," "God understands," "Let's not be so strict." Another symptom of this spiritual distortion is when the leader introduces practices or ideas that have no biblical basis but are presented as new revelations or spiritual freedoms. Emotion becomes authority. Experience becomes doctrine. The Bible takes a backseat. When a church ceases to be confronted by the truth and begins to be seduced by teachings that justify error, that ministry is no longer leading God's people. It is leading human emotions. That is where the Jezebel pattern finds room to exert influence. Sign 4. Resistance and hostility towards confronting voices. The fourth sign appears when leadership begins to systematically reject anyone who confronts, questions, or asks for clarity. It's not about protecting unity. It's about protecting their own influence. A leader under this spiritual pattern does not tolerate correction. She does not receive counsel. She does not listen to warnings. Any attempt to speak with her is perceived as a personal attack, and every voice that calls for truth is considered a threat. In these cases, mature people, Bible teachers, discerning brothers, or associate pastors are displaced, silenced, or ridiculed, not because they are wrong, but because they are an obstacle. Sometimes hostility manifests itself subtly: sarcastic comments, exclusion from important meetings, decisions made without consultation, or simple distances that communicate, "I don't want you to question me." In other cases, the resistance is open and public. The most serious consequence is that this attitude not only divides, but also silences the prophetic voice of the church. When mature voices are expelled or silenced, the congregation becomes vulnerable to decisions driven by emotions, hurt feelings, or personal ambitions. Biblical leadership embraces correction. Leadership influenced by a Jezebel pattern fights against it. Therein lies the true nature of the influence at work. Sign 5. Using the authority of the husband or the senior pastor to impose decisions. The fifth sign arises when the leader does not act from her own position, but from the authority borrowed from another person, usually from the husband or the senior pastor. This is not support, it is substitution. She makes decisions, leads groups, and moves structures, but always using the phrase, "The pastor delegated it to me. My husband already knows. The vision was given to me." At this point, the church stops listening to the true leader and begins to indirectly obey someone who wasn't called to that position. Authority ceases to be clear and becomes diffuse. The pastor's voice is diluted. Decisions begin to flow from the leader's emotions, preferences, or hurt feelings, not from biblical order. When someone starts speaking and making decisions on behalf of someone who doesn't actually make those decisions, a serious problem arises. Not only is the spiritual covering broken, but a structure that God established for protection and balance is usurped. This pattern is one of the most difficult to identify because outwardly it appears to be support. Inwardly, it is control. Sign 6. Appearance as a tool of influence and power. The sixth sign appears when appearance ceases to be a personal matter and becomes an instrument of influence. We are not talking about good taste or appropriate presentation. We are talking about an intention behind the image. In some cases, the leader begins to wear exaggerated, flashy, or attention-grabbing clothing, even on the altar. She is not seeking to honor God, but to impress. The platform becomes a stage. Her presence ceases to communicate humility and begins to communicate power, confidence, and dominance. This can also be seen in details such as excessive visual production, heavier makeup when directing, accessories that accentuate her figure, or a body posture that conveys superiority. All of this, although it may seem superficial, reveals a deeper motivation. Image becomes a means to reinforce her position. The problem isn't how a person dresses, but why they do it. When appearance overshadows the message, when visual presence takes center stage, and when the public's focus shifts to the figure instead of to God, it opens the door to a kind of influence that doesn't build up. Spiritual authority is replaced by visual charisma. Signal 7. Total rejection of authority and lack of accountability. The seventh sign is the most dangerous and the most difficult to correct. It is the absolute rejection of authority. Healthy leadership recognizes limits. It receives advice. It accepts correction. It seeks spiritual guidance. But when someone operates under this pattern, these functions disappear. The leader stops submitting to any kind of supervision. She rejects discipline. She considers it unnecessary to give explanations. She feels that no one is on her spiritual level. He interprets all correction as an attack, and he claims that his direct relationship with God is sufficient to justify any decision. This rejection produces a dangerous isolation. The person is left alone in their judgment, alone in their interpretation, alone in their vision. and a leader without accountability becomes an impossible figure to correct. The congregation, without realizing it, falls under a leadership that no longer answers to anyone and recognizes no boundaries. When there is no room for dialogue, when there is no oversight, when the leader becomes untouchable, it is a sign that the Jezebel pattern has reached its most visible stage. At that point, the church ceases to be guided and begins to be controlled. However, identifying these signs does not mean starting a conflict or pointing fingers. Recognizing them is only the first step. The response must be mature, spiritual, and deeply biblical. The first thing to understand is that the problem is not the person, but the pattern that is operating. It is combated in prayer, it is discerned in fasting, and it is communicated clearly. The goal is not to destroy leadership, but to restore it. The second step is to talk to the person involved, not from a place of accusation, but from a place of truth accompanied by love. A direct, respectful, and honest dialogue can reveal whether there is a willingness to change. In many cases, these attitudes stem from inner wounds, a lack of education, or poorly managed emotional baggage. If there is no openness to dialogue, the next step is to involve 2 or 3 mature leaders who can objectively assess the situation. Shared correction prevents injustices and protects the congregation. And if after all this there is no repentance, no change, no willingness to submit to a healthy spiritual structure, then the church must distance itself and protect its integrity. Tolerating a destructive pattern has never produced healing. Sometimes, stepping aside is the only way to correct something that no longer wants to be corrected. We have seen that this pattern is neither new nor rare. When it appears, it damages relationships, contaminates leadership, and weakens the spiritual life of an entire congregation. That is why it is so important to discern it in time and act with maturity. If this content helped you, please share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. Your support allows us to continue producing serious, in-depth, and biblical teachings to build up the church.